Hey everyone, Tony here. Just wanted to give a short explanation about some of the audio problems that you may hear during this podcast. As always, recording remotely online is a challenge, and also Dwayne and I are learning through this process. So I hope that it's not too distracting. I'm doing my best to fix it, and I appreciate your patience. We will improve in the future. Now, on to the podcast.
And I'm joined with Tony, as always, on Tree Actions, the Human Forestry podcast. And our guest today is Thor Clausen, who, I'm not even sure exactly specific the year when I got to know you, Thor. It was probably at a training program that we took together.
It would have been 97. I think 96, 97. So I took Rip Tompkins came up to Vancouver through Beaver Bill in North Vancouver, and he did his first little training thing. And Ken was supposed to come up and couldn't cross the border, and Rip came up and just did a demo. It was supposed to be a course, and there wasn't maybe a half a dozen people there. Myself and old friend from the Kootenays and a couple other guys. And we just watched Rip climb a tree and everything else because I hadn't ever seen this spurless climbing stuff. And he was awesome. It was impressive. So we signed up for a whole raft of courses. And then there was this guy, Dwayne Newstater, who was a assistant to Ken at the time, or to Rip at the time. And we were out in somewhere out in the valley somewhere because Blair Veach arranged it for us. And that's the first time I met Blair. We were on this course, and Blair came out in his blue dress shirt and his white hard hat, looking all prim and proper. And that's the first time you actually lied to me when you told me that you burnt the end of your pinky off with a rope that running through the rigging just to earn your right. I remember all these details. But it was an absolutely fabulous time. There wasn't a lot of guys there. Maybe there might have been a half a dozen guys on that course, and it was just you and Rip doing everything and teaching us a whole bunch of advanced rigging and all sorts of stuff. So it was a hoot. Yeah, it was. It might have been on Delta. Yeah. And then after that. They came up with a better model for the courses, and I took the chainsaw and the climbing and the rigging, and then Norm became your assistant with Arb Canada or with Arbormaster, and then I just started. You had this little deal where we could come back and redo the courses, and I was like a fly on shit. I was there all the time. And finally, it came to a point where you couldn't come to one of the courses, and Norm called me up and said, "Hey, I need an assistant." So that's sort of how it started. I started being his Joe boy, and got my first experience walking through the Husky warehouse down there. And going with Norm to the Husky warehouse was awesome because he just had no qualms about grabbing anything off the shelves that we possibly thought we might have needed. It was fun.
I remember that pre-course climb with Rip. We were getting prepped for that class, and it was one of my first times ever working in the West Coast or in Vancouver area. And we had ascended into these. I believe they were poplars of some kind, cottonwoods. They were
huge cottonwoods. Yeah, they were big trees.
They were huge. And we were spurring up and up, and I was intimidated, would be, to say the least. And I don't know that. I'd like to talk to Rip about it. He'd probably remember because he was just giving her, and we'd gone up a long way, and to the one side of us was a deep ravine. And so It even magnified the altitude perception. And we'd gone up to about, I remember the wood would normally fell back in Alberta. Like it was all of that. Like looking up, this is like a 40-foot or so tree. And Rip's like, and I was keeping toe to toe with Rip because, begod, if I'm going to be outdone, I got to show myself, right? And I look across, and he's beside me. I don't know how far away, but he's in the tree beside me. And he looks at me and says, "I'm taking it right here." And I wasn't prepared for that. Like I wouldn't have normally ever taken a top at that height. But I mean, these were big trees at the base.
I remember those trees. They were about 140. So you're at about the 100-foot level where Rip was popping a top out. Same thing happened to me on one of the first major rigging courses I did with Norm. We were down at UBC. And it was about 120 or 130 foot tree. And Norm's talking to the guys and he says, strip it out, prep it out so that we can do square block rigging on this thing. So I went up to the top, and that wasn't too bad because I'm used to, trees well over 100 feet where I'm at here. And I took the top off, but it was a little strange. And the first one to go up, there's about 10, 11 guys. And this is the 3 courses in a row. It was the climbing, the chainsaw, the climbing, and then the rigging. And the first one, the only one to go up to the top, because I blew the top out at about 90 feet. And the only one to go up that high was actually Karen, Blair Reach's wife. And she went to the top and rigged out the first piece, and that kind of, put it onto the boys to go up after that. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. Wow, that is interesting. There's a lot of my memory of that time is there was so much that happened in that first few years, like really so much that happened and took place.
It grew so fast, it grew so quickly. It wasn't, I think I'd hung out with Norm at about 3 or 4 courses. And then I got the call to do, to help him out. And I assisted him on 3 and 4. And then I got the call from you saying, hey, Norm can't get out there. I'm going to ship you the gear. There you go. And off you go. It was a little more fly by the seat of your pants, if you will. I'd been a certified arborist for a long time, and I've been in the tree care industry essentially my whole life, working in the orchards and everything else. So, and it was fun. I enjoyed. That's the one thing I missed after I sold to Bartlett is I couldn't go train anymore, and I miss it. I miss it a lot. I like watching these guys that surpass anything that I could have ever thought of. When you think about Brian French, ascending the giants, coming to my climbing course, and you see this guy when he's first starting out, and now he's got books and teaches around the world, and it's just amazing to see these guys. We had an experience here which was phenomenal. Just to give you an idea of the community, we had the PNW, the ISA conference in Kelowna. This is before I sold to Bartlett. I think it would have been around 2007, 2008, something like that, maybe a little earlier. Yeah, it would have been right around there. So I had at my house, I had Michael Taine sleeping in my daughter's bunk bed. I had Rupert and his guys sleeping in the floor of the shop and the barn. I had Brian French in a tree hammock in the field. I had Ed Carpenter. I think he was in the spare room in the house. And Samson Ropes had sent us up a couple of 4x4 totes of cut-ends. And we sat in the shop till all hours of the morning, drinking beer and telling stories and splicing rope to give away his prize. I mean, it was an absolutely amazing thing. And then you see these guys where Ed's gotten to, and Brian's at, and still keeping in good touch with Ruby over at Bouchard. So it was a pretty amazing thing. And those connections were all through our Arbormaster of Canada.
Yep, absolutely they are. And then, I'm curious how you viewed you talk about, Norm, talked very similarly about, the basically, keep coming back and you'll be put to work potentially, which wasn't even the intended model. It just sort of evolved that way. But then moving it into the trainer model, like, because you're one of the few that came before that and came through that. And
yeah, we did the first when you separated from Arb Canada, when you moved from Arb Canada over or Arbormaster over to Arb Canada, we had that first train the trainer, and we did that in conjunction with Scott Profit down at his shop in Atlanta in Georgia. But man, he hired an executive chef that used to cook for an airline buddy of his, like a private airline. So he hired this executive chef, and the food, I don't know if you remember it at all. We were there for 7 days, and it was intense. Like, we were balls to the wall from 8 a.m. till we got back to Scott's place in the evening. And I put on 11 pounds in 7 days. That first night, the guy shows up there and he's got chocolate bourbon pecan pie with homemade French vanilla ice cream. Now, after about the fourth piece of that, I'm going, Jesus, I got to slow down a little bit. It was amazing, and to be sitting around Scott's shop with those guys and going through that. I think that was your first shot at an intensive program, in the base of the all the instructor training and stuff. So I mean, I think Johnny Ransom was there, and myself, and Hordike, and you, and Norm was down there.
Warren was there too.
Seven of us total, with Scott included.
There was
Warren there too.
Warren was there. Bruce.
I don't think Dr. Smooth was there. Well, he might have been at that one.
I think he was.
Tane was there.
Tane was it was incredible. I mean, it was so much going on.
Tane wasn't there yet. Tane wasn't at that one. Javier, Otis was there.
Oh yeah.
House had to be there because that's where the platoon started. Right?
No, I don't think so. That was after that. That was at the first trainer. That was at the first train. The trainer that was down in Tampa, in Florida. And that was the first train the trainer event down there.
Yeah.
That was interesting too. Do you remember when we showed up there? The guy walked us around, showing us the fire ant piles and telling us what crocodile barking sounds like, and that it's mating season. Just a different get up from where we're at out here.
And the manatees in the river. Tane was not at Tony, the platoon wording. I believe it was Bruce, or not, or maybe it was someone else that maybe Tane was there. I don't think Tane was in there in 07. I'm not sure. I'll have to check. But I usually would remember that, but maybe he was. You might be right. I have to look at the pictures. But anyway, it doesn't matter. It was that was the first one. And I don't know, Tony, were you not working with that yet at the time, or what?
No, 2007. I was still working with a family company, and I think I did an Arbor Master course in I did one in 97, 98, and then so I knew Scott and Rip, and I was volunteering at the ITCC since like 2000. So I knew Scott through those avenues, and then I think there was a point where North American Training Solutions, when he started, it was North American Tree Service. And then he started the training company on the side. And it was like him and Otis and Warren. And what happened is they were doing those Vermeer seminars. And there's a Vermeer dealer like an hour from my house. And I think Scott flew all the way up to do it, like in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And I saw him at the ITCC. Yeah, I saw him at the ITCC in 2007. And I think it was Hawaii. Anyway, we're standing at the urinal and we're taking a piss. And I look over at Scott. I'm like, Scott, why did you fly all the way to Harrisburg to do that Vermeer seminar when I'm an hour down the road? He's like, we need to talk. And he invited me to that was 2008. That's when he invited me to come.
Scott sent me to one down in Fresno, California. I went down there by myself, and I met up with Scott Johnson from Memphis.
Oh, yeah.
He was the Vermeer
guy.
And I don't think I've talked to him 5 or 6 years. I gave him a call a while back. Him and I got along. We were at quite a few events together and hung out quite a bit. But went down there. I got to climb my first eucalyptus down there. Got up about, I guess it must have been maybe 40 people. It was a big seminar. It was a really big seminar. And we were out in this area where they had these ukes that had to come down. And I think I was up about 60 feet. And there's a big bark plate comes up. There's a frickin' spider the size of a inner plate, and of course you're all tied in. You can't fucking run away and that.
Right.
And one guy, one little guy on the ground, he said, just brush it out of the way. It doesn't bite. But that was fun to be able to climb and rig and do the demo, and then drop this big uke. It had to be almost 3 feet through the butt. That was a fun seminar. Yeah. And then on the way back to the airport, Scott Johnson and he picks me up in the airport. He's going to drop me off. His flight's pretty early at a shitty flight setup. I guess Scott was a little cheap to fly me direct, but I went from Fresno to LA, Seattle to Spokane, where I'd driven down from here. And as we're driving out, Scott points over at these mountains. He says, "Hey, that's the Sierra Nevadas. We're about an hour from where General Sherman is, the world's largest tree." I'm going, fuck me, that's on my bucket list. And we're on the way to the airport. Would have stayed an extra couple of days.
That's cool. Yeah. Those Vermeer seminars, that's kind of how like Nat started They were just doing the seminars, and it was a great place as a trainer to like kind of cut your teeth. Because right after the 2008 trainer, I went and Bruce and I did a bunch of
was it 2008? Was that the one? Was that the one? The first one in Tampa, Dwayne? That 2008. Yeah, that's where I met Tony.
Yep.
That's right.
That's when I first met you.
And then was it the second one where we had to do our certification, or was it the first one?
It was the second one. Well, we did them at both, but it was. We did them at both. We did them all three, actually. We were talking with Norm about this yesterday, and he did the chainsaw station in Georgia, and you were the risk assessment guy, and you continued on with that. You did
I did a lot on that course. That was one of the most intimidating things, is when you had to actually teach the course and demonstrate. So that they had loblolly pines down there. I'd never been in those. Holy pitchy. So I was lucky. I was the first guy up the tree. I had to rig out a big limb. I had to set everything else rig out. And as you're setting it up, you're looking down, and there's yourself and Scott Prophet and Bruce and, a lot of the main guys of the industry that everybody knows sitting there watching you with their little notepads. And it was slightly intimidating. And then the next guy up after me was Dr. Smooth, and then it was Bruce. Silverback. I don't know if you remember the video that he took when he got down. He was just covered in just completely covered in pitch. His legs, everything was covered in pitch. And he did this little snippet about this is the new climbing gear where you don't need anything, you just stick to the tree as you go up.
Yeah, I do remember it. I still have it saved. The show Dirty Jobs was considering doing an episode on arborist, and Scott asked me to dig up footage and that stuff because they had contacted North American at the time, and that was one of the it can get right.
No, it was a blast, and we did our felling on palm trees, which was pretty unique for a guy from the Pacific Northwest up here, or southwestern British Columbia, Pacific Northwest of the States. But to go down and fall palm trees was pretty interesting.
Yeah, it was. I know a lot of people commented on that, having the not only the enjoyment of it and the novelty of it, but also the nervousness of it being tested on. It's a freaking palm tree. I never felled a palm tree before.
Yeah, it's like a bundle of straws, man. It was just like a bundle of straws. Yeah, some of the things that we were able to do, like we did. There was the ISA conference in Victoria. And we were able through Arb Canada to be able to set up an elevator in the tree. And bring all these municipal arborists up 100 feet into this redwood so that they could overlook Victoria and the harbor. I think we ran up, it must have been 30 people we brought up to the top that day. Zeb was there, and myself and a couple other guys running this thing. And at the end of the conference, Shigo was the keynote speaker. And we all went over to Rupert's place down in Bouchard on the bay, and we had salmon and prawns and crab dinner. Like Rupert put on a spread with Alex and his wife, and to be able, you had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with Alex, but to spend a few hours over dinner with him and his daughter and stuff was phenomenal. That's the only. I don't have very many regrets in life. I should have a lot more, but I don't regret a lot of the things I did. I should, but I don't. The only regret I have is you called me up and you said, "Hey, I'm going down to," I think it was is it Denbo, wherever Alex was from. Yeah. What was the town? It starts with a D, but anyway, you called Durham. Yeah, I still have that CD of him reading all his pithy points, and I listen to that every once in a while. And you hit the clock in the background and his wife chuckling, and it was amazing. But you had invited me down to come and spend a week down with Shigo, because you would go down just about annually, and said, "Hey, you want to come down with me?" And I just couldn't swing it. And then he died the next year, and it was just one of those. That's my only regret. I would have loved to have gone down there and had that personal time. Because I had a little bit of an experience at that conference. I met him a couple other times. But that was just through our Canada and our Canada event, and just the people that we knew that was offering those opportunities.
Yeah, I'm curious, Thor, how you're, there's so many people that have, well, a lot of, that's not the right way to put it. We've had maintained good relationships with people that, maybe found us as students or friends and then evolved into instructors, and then, through circumstance, like selling a business or like in your case, and have continued to have that friendship. How, and part of this is to, trying to connect those experiences, the experiences of being connected with Arbor Canada. How has that continued, or has it continued to affect your career, or does it still play a role? Because you gave there's a lot of free time given, like, there's just so much you invest in being a trainer, period, let alone a trainer for us. And somebody that's with us now, how would you characterize that experience?
I wouldn't trade any of that for anything in the world. Absolutely anything in the world, because I know there's guys that I haven't touched base with in a long time, like Johnny Ransom. Andrew, I touch base with every few years, just reconnected with Norm. Yourself, we hook up once, or we talk once in a while. But I know in deep down that I can, if I don't see these guys for 10 years, I know I can call them up and it's going to be like yesterday. One of the prime example of that is when our good friend James had his accident last year. And I called him up, and I hadn't talked to him in a long time. And Tane was there sitting with him, and Tane and I talked for probably an hour and a half. I got to say my goodbyes to James. James was an interesting guy. He was the first guy to really piss me off at a course. So he came to everything that I taught. And he became a great trainer. He was a great guy, but he came to every course that I ever taught. And we did this advanced rigging course. He brought up the goods. I had goods. We had all this gear. We had these huge oak trees that had to come down for condo development and we were doing picks and lifts and drifts and all sorts of, unreal rigging that you'd never, ever be able to do in a regular kind of scenario. And then we always got the student evaluations at the end, and everybody checks that 9 and 10 box and exceeds expectations and blah, blah, blah. And I pick up James's, and it's all 5s. It's all met expectations, not excels or none of that stuff. It's just met my expectations. I was pissed because I'd never had, like, it was like a weird adjudication, like it was the first real critique, that it's so next course he was up at, he was actually assisting. And I said, what the hell's this bullshit? And he says, look, I've been to all your courses, and my expectations are incredibly high for what Canada delivered and what they delivered. And my expectations were so high that you met my expectations, but they were high. You didn't exceed them because it's hard to do that, because he had set such a high standard for the stuff we'd already taught. So it was a real eye-opener for me,
He's an iron sharpens iron kind of guy.
And he had his from Bellingham. He had I think it was Dan was his right hand guy down there, and it looked like his little kid brother. They looked identical, the same ponytail, everything else. He drug around with him. He was fun to hang out with.
And it's interesting because I.
And I think James was pretty much like his supervisor, taught him to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm not sure how that went.
Victoria from Royal Roads.
That sounds really really familiar.
I believe he has passed away.
To Dave from Victoria from
Royal
Roads.
Yeah, and if he hasn't, he's very well. I know Rupert
bad Crohn's.
And I talked to yes, he did. He did pass away. Yeah.
I taught a whole course in that massive arbutus tree out in front of the castle. So you imagine this castle and this massive arbutus tree, and you do the whole climbing course inside this tree. It was awesome. And then we did the felling course. My son, I think he was 14, and he used to come with me on those things. So Dave, we're doing hazard and danger tree falling and bucking. And there's this cedar tree. It had to be 4 or 5 feet at the butt, maybe 160 feet had failed and wiggled itself in amongst all these other trees. There were pinch points and tension wood frickin' everywhere. And Dave says, in front of the class, he takes us up to this spot. This is where we're going to start. And he says, he looks at me and he says, and you want intimidation and a little bit of fear. You know, he says, I didn't know how to attack this one here. He says, we got to get this out of here. Here's your saw. Take this one apart. You're looking at this thing just trying to figure out where things are going to fly. And you just got to figure out what they're flying to. He was a blast. He was so much fun.
I think it's been part of the the mystique or whatever it is about our, the way we deliver training, because it's the undeniable part of it that people, even the worst critic, has to say, we don't just sit and talk about it, and we take more or less what we're given. There's been the odd arbor master disaster, as they sometimes get called, but it's reality, and we deal with it, and we stand and deliver and do it. It's not. I don't know how many times people would say, even at a seminar, we would just be doing a chainsaw seminar, and guys like, you actually felled the tree and cut it and showed us, we watched you drop a tree, not just drop a tree, but you told us where it was going to land. You put a mark where it was going to land. You held yourself accountable. You made yourself accountable. You did it. And then you continued to show us. He said, I've just never seen anything like that, And
remember when we did, a good example of that is when we were contracted with Fortis, the power company in the Kootenays. And you and I basically are driving out there developing a course that we're going to teach them. And they get out in the bush, and we couldn't use high tension lines. We did in Oliver. They shut down an actual power line that we were able to drop trees onto and play with. But when we got out to Nelson, they had strung a power line between these two poles that we were able to dump trees on and show them how to get them off of the trees. And then when Norm and I went out, they took us out to this the dam site. We got a dam tour. It was a pretty nice dam tour. And they had this cluster of logs in the bottom of this catch basin, and they always had difficulty with it. And they wanted to know how to get down inside there and buck it all up and clean it out safely. So you kind of developing these things as you go. It was a hoot. And I knew you bastard. You turned that fucking heated seat on. The whole trip out there, my ass is sweating, my back's sweating. What the hell?
I had seen a vehicle.
Freaking awful. I'd never had a heated seat before. And it took them almost a day and a half before you just started laughing so hard that you had to give into it.
It was a rental, and we loaded up, and I was like, oh, look at that. That's interesting. And I turned them on the way out, just trying them out. I think when. And we were driving along, and you were sitting there squirming, and I totally forgot about the seat. And
I was driving.
And you're
sitting in the passenger seat.
I do not understand this friggin' truck. And I remember the one time you had your hat, you took your hat, and you whipped it into the dash, stuffed it between the windshield and the vent, and it was like, I do not get this friggin' truck. It is so hot. And I would laugh so hard, and I had every intention of telling you, but you'd get it out of your system, and we'd get on talking about something else, and it would be an hour later, 2 hours later, and it was maybe a 4 or 5 hour drive. It could happen 3 or 4 times maybe, and then the next morning is when I said it, because we got in and we had about a half-hour drive, and we're halfway through it, and that was it. You're like, I do not understand this vehicle. And I finally was able to tell you, and you were like, you bastard. And you know what, Thor, that has continued to be a thing. It may have faded now. I don't know. It'd be interesting to know what that. I never talked with the guys about it, but it happens in my family to this day. The boys do it. I mean, it is like, maybe I don't think we invented it, but it certainly has caused a legacy ripple to stay throughout there. Tony, so you know
it is. It's standard operating procedure when you're with another Arbor Canada instructor to like serendipitously reach over and turn their seat on. In fact, you like it's a thing. Like,
yeah, well, that's where it started with this little white-haired dude.
Yeah, I knew that, and it's like, but it's funny how those little stories become like part of the culture, right? Because I mean, it is if you're the driver, you have to reach over. Like if you don't do it, you're not an Arbor Canada instructor. I will give you a hard time if you don't try and do it to me, because it's just part of what we do.
There was another thing that got me
hilarious.
Good in Vancouver. It was just, I think it was my second course. I think I was assisting Norm on, just my second one, And he had stayed out at Blair Beach's place, and I stayed at the hotel on UBC. And Rupert Evans is banging on my patio door in the morning, and he jumps over the balcony, and him and Norm had set this up. And I'm standing there, and Rupert's going, "Oh, Norm, man, he's like just got gooned last night. He's sick as a dog. I can't wake him up, man. He's not going to show up. You got to teach the whole course by yourself." I'm not ready for this. I assisted one course, dude. And they just played me like a fiddle. It was, they got me pretty good.
Oh yeah.
The one thing that I super appreciated, especially with Dwayne, Norm, like we were so tight. Still are, that you could say anything. When we did this, this is when Neil Thiessen did our first thing, and we had to give negative criticisms, and we had to stand with our about a foot apart from each other with our hands behind our backs. And Norm gave me a criticism that I still use to this day, and it was humbling. And it really made me think, because I'm 6'4", at that time my climbing weight was 240. I'm like not a small guy, and I'm passionate about the industry, and I was super passionate about teaching. So Dwayne and I are standing there face to face, and he looks at me and says, "You got to be careful." He said, "You intimidate students into learning. You're not, you're just your size and your passion and your voice." He said, "You intimidate people. You've got to really, dial it down." And no one had ever told me anything like that before. So I catch myself still, even with my guys in the shop that I'm running and stuff, that I really have to be aware of my size. I've got to make myself a little bit more diminutive,
more reachable, so that you're not intimidating.
So I use that bit of advice that Dwayne forced.
And my one to him is he's
the worst fucking driver. He's on the gas. That's why I tried to drive every time him and I were around.
Fair play, and you're not the first person to say that. And one thing I will say, Thor, you were always good about that. Like, whatever it was, you would take it seriously. Like when a ground assessment was given, and you would learn from it, and you would take it to heart, and you would change. Like you would make a change. It was impressive, and
it was important to me. You guys, and teaching, like. Our industry. I mean, we've lost people. I just had one of my climbers here fall 30 feet last month. Got banged up pretty good. And we know what happened to Dave Lutz. His incident. Scott Profits had a fall. I know a bunch of people that have passed away in our industry. Holly at the coast. Him and I sat on the board of directors for the West. On the board of directors for the Arborist Apprenticeship Committee, and he came to all the courses, and he was a good guy, knew what he was doing. He made one mistake. He didn't double tie like we're supposed to, and he had his lanyard failed, and he fell to his death. And so we're teaching these guys, so if you're not passionate about it and you don't really have the best interest of everybody at heart, you shouldn't be doing it. And that's how I felt, and you instilled that in all of us. And then guys like Bruce was the same. Bruce was amazing. Like his passion for people, and his care of people. Who was the little mini monkey that hung around with him? Otis. Otis was a passionate little individual, a little different.
Yeah. He still is, and Otis still has that passion for, like, he's still involved in his own way, isn't he, Tony?
Yeah, he does some subcontract climbing, and every time I talk to, what I've noticed about Otis is he's always 5 steps ahead of everybody else. I swear to God, like every time like last time I talked to him, he's like, I don't know, he was like buying boats and he was refinishing and then selling them. So like he was flipping boats, and then like the market around him just exploded. And then he like, "Oh, I'm tired of doing that." And he moved on to something else. But no, he's still climbing, still going at it. I mean, what I learned from a guy like Otis was like the funniest thing I ever saw. Otis, and I think Bruce was with me. Like there was this, I think it was a Vermeer seminar, and there was someone there, and basically Otis was getting heckled, right? Like this guy's like, I guess the guy wanted to teach the course, but he wasn't. And Otis just looked at him straight in the face, says, "Hey, you back there, why don't you just shut up? I'm trying to teach here." And the guy's like, was so shocked. He just shut up, and he didn't say, like, it just totally shut him down. It was like, I'm like, you can do that? And Bruce is over there like, but now I'm not quite that bad, but from that, like watching the other instructors teach, I'm like, you know what, sometimes it's just best to deal with something like that head on, like, hey, dude, like if you think like, you're kind of distracting here, if you can't, keep your conversation down, it was just cool things. Like
he was neat. That was people. The one, I think you were there, Tony, in Tampa. We had that one night where everybody was just gathered around one of the cabins, showing off all the different gear that they were making, the splices that they were making, and Otis had a whole bunch of stuff that was kind of out there. It was never really practical. I still have half that stuff in my bag. I kept it all. Yeah. I still got. Rip gave me a piece, the very first piece of. What was that? That thinner rope that Samson made for the first time. It was
Ultratech or Ultratech or 10X, but
no, it was a climbing line. It was a 7/16 climbing line. The first foray at that. Velocity, and it was the first piece that he was given to test. And we were I was at a course somewhere with Rip, and he gave me that piece, so I still have that piece. And then another like things that you got to experience, like the first time we went down to the Samson ropes, and I think the guy's name was Dr. Chu, was the head chemist down there, and he says, "Don't tell me how to make a rope. Tell me what you want the rope to do, and I'll make it." And that's where we started. That's where we came up with ice, which is other than the coating, which changed, is still the same thing that we climb on. And to sit there and look at it and be a part of it, was pretty amazing to sit down and go through the factory. I still have a piece of half-inch line that was an experimental line that was a 16 braid, but was a different style of braid that I kept, and a few other things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was.
That was a good trip.
I agree. It was fun to be part of all of that, and it's interesting. I'm curious what both your thoughts are on, because it seems to me like I don't know that has stopped happening, or if we're just not as involved in it. I'm not sure what's happened, but because it seems like what happens now, like we get. I feel like we're the old guys that get told, look, this is the new cool thing. And it's like, well, who came up with this and where did this come from? And, it's been tested and it's been tried by all the, the cool kids sort of like, and it's like, I thought we still had a lot of the cool kids on our team, but it seems like R&D has taken on almost a manufacturer's discretion or license, and it isn't quite as much from the field anymore or as organic. I'm curious what your observations are on that.
Mine are much the same, because when we started with arboriculture, like the first, I'll go way back, is the first course that was a climbing course that Dave Slidell came to, and he came to learn the Blake hitch, right? That's why he got there. And then we showed him the Blake hitch and how to tie it and all that kind of stuff. And he said, "Well, this is called the painter's hitch. We used to use this when we're painting buildings. Same hitch." Right, but it was never in the arboriculture industry. And then we moved on to the Swabish and the Newt and the Diestel and the Valdetane and all that kind of stuff, and things got more accelerated. But I think what's happened is it's just a progression. Arboriculture was just basic, so basic when we got started in it. Spurs, a lanyard, and a rope, and that's it. And gear has been developed, and it's become the proper industry that it should be, partly because of guys like yourself and Scott Prophet with the Porter Wrap and these companies that allowed us to do things and test things. I got to climb on the very first zigzag, and those kind of things. It was a prototype, and Dunlop was at a conference, and because I was part of Arb Canada, he came over and started to chat and said, "What do you think of this thing I'm testing out?" And you got to play with it and all that kind of stuff. And I think what's happened now is it's progressed way beyond just the basics, that companies themselves are starting to do research into this and are doing tweaks and things. Toby Sherrill was pretty good at coming up with stuff and marketing the first things. Cheap out on a few things, but
Yeah, no, he was also very involved, and he's not gone or anything. I talked to Toby just the other day, but he's not as involved in quite the same way for sure. But yeah, Tony, what do you think?
No, I agree with Thor. I think that's part of it. There was more room for innovation, or it was at a basic level. I also think too that I think now a lot of the manufacturers, they basically choose the people they want to talk to based on a lot of social media.
Who can help them market
like who's popular, and I think that's driving a lot. And that's not to say that those guys and girls are bad. There's a lot of great people out there that have a big social media presence that are excellent arborists and very skilled. But I think that their selection process is a little different because they have more to select from now. Because back in early 2000s, there was pretty much us, and there wasn't the social media presence. So who would you go to? You'd go to talk to people at climbing competitions. Yeah, that was us. You'd go to ISA conference. Yeah, that was us. So it was a select market. I think it was driven
too, though. Like, I think all of the guys at NATS, and especially Arb Canada and Arbormaster, they had a want to move the industry forward as a whole. Just to advance the industry and advance the gear and make it safer. That was the whole deal. I mean, we can all tell stories, about things that have happened. Before I, took some of the courses, I had I got a picture of me at my father-in-law's place when I was probably long after I was married, probably about 27. I'm up about 50 feet in this big willow tree. I got my legs wrapped around it with a chainsaw, not tied into nothing, no gear, no hard hat, no nothing. And I still got that picture just because I had balls as big as Manhattan, and it didn't scare me. I had no idea what was out there until I started going through the courses and the climbing courses and figured how close I came to frickin' dying so many times, and that was, I think our goal was to just make people safe and comfortable. I had one, this is a good story. Norm and I were teaching out at UBC, and it was the end of the 3-day course. We had this school teacher. He never even picked up a chainsaw, rope, nothing. And he takes the climbing, he takes the rigging and everything else. And he's up in the tree. So Norm's got me up I'm tied in at about 80 feet and in a side tree, so I could swing over and attach to the tree and help these guys tie their knots and come back and help them with their cuts and all that kind of stuff. Well, this guy, his knees were knocking and things were shaking, and you can swing over and you can talk him through it, help him be safe, and he was comfortable. By the time he did a second or third rig, he was comfortable. Bad part of that day is I didn't get to come down the whole freaking day. I was up there for 8 hours. Norm orders a pizza for lunch, and he takes 2 pieces of pizza, slaps them together, hitches them on my line, and says, "There's your freaking lunch." And up it goes.
Yeah, Norm, I can see Norm doing that. That's for sure. Oh, man. And how many... 5-6 years, Thor, that you were like a lead instructor, you'd say, with us, or was it? I'd say
it would have been all of that. It would have been probably 6 years. And then when I sold the Bartlett, I mean, my 2008, 2009 kicked my ass. I was building my company to sell the Bartlett so that I could go do more training and have more free time. And I'd already been in negotiations with Noah Violini out at the coast because we'd done a crane course with him. I'd led a crane removal course on his property for Bartlett. And I had taken on a lot of debt with equipment, and it kicked my ass. And so you go 2 months, and all of a sudden you're $80,000 into your line of credit. And you're going, holy shit! If I don't put out this fire, I'm going to lose my house, my farm, everything. And this isn't long after a divorce. It took the first half of it, so I called Noah, and we came up with a deal. It got me out of debt, gave me a good job. Bartlett's a great company to work for. They get leased back on my property and things, but I can't just step away like I used to be able to do to go train for 3 weeks or a month at a time. You and I did a stint where we did a train the trainer in Florida, packed for this trip. We did a train the trainer in Florida, in Tampa. I think that was trainer 2 or trainer 3. And then flew to Winnipeg to give the same course to the city of Winnipeg staff. We get off the plane, it's minus 22. So you go from just hot to cold. I've got a coffee meeting actually next week with a guy from the Winnipeg City staff that took these courses with us.
Wow.
And he's now moved out to the Okanagan, and he's retired from the city of Winnipeg, and he's trying to find a job with a municipality here. And he called me up and he said, hey, I'm so and so. You taught us in Winnipeg all the time.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool. So I'm going to go have coffee with him next week and see if I can help him get in with the district or somebody like that.
Nice. We had a training planning meeting with Martha last week, and your name came up. Yeah, we were chatting.
Is Dude still kicking around out there?
Yes, I believe he is. I'm not sure what he does. Yeah.
He was interesting because he's another guy that fell 40 feet and onto his back and survived. And I asked dudes, I says, how long does it take to call 40 feet? And his description was, That was it.
Yeah.
That was it. Was he the one that had the dotted line around his neck?
No. That there was a guy at City of Winnipeg. That wasn't Lutz. No, Lutz never did work for the city.
Not Lutz, Dudes.
No, his name was still there. No, that was he's not there anymore. He never was in management. I know what you mean. I can't remember his name. No, Dudes is still there. Dudes is a supervisor now, and he still works there.
But that's the when you guys started City of Winnipeg. I remember my first time out there. These guys were good climbers. You've done a bunch of courses with them already, but they had a budget larger than your training budget for them to deal with damaged material because it was just a given they were going to smash a bus stop and a fence and stop signs and whatever, just wrecking shit because they didn't know what they were doing. So they took that money and they put it into the training budget and they stopped wrecking stuff.
Yeah. Well, they had the fatality, and after. They had to do training, and it was a couple years later that the head of forestry, but he said it was more than, like, the total sum was more than double of what the training cost in damages. It was just a line item. I think it was 10 or 15 grand a month. Or 20 grand a month during elm removal.
It was over 100 grand a year.
Yeah,
it was well over 100 grand.
It was over 100 grand a year. It was well over 100 grand a year.
Damage. It was just in the budget line. It wasn't even an argument. It was just that's what happens. And because if they didn't have a bucket, couldn't get to it, and they weren't supposed to climb it, they would just cut it, and they would tell the guy, look, we're going to fix it, but this is what's going to happen. And the homeowner would be like, okay, so, take whatever you want off the fence and the deck. We will hopefully avoid the eaves troughs, but we'll fix that too. And they just smash cornfield. You don't need any training on how to rig. I need training on how to fix roofs. I ain't got time for training on rigging. I know how to do that. I need to how to fix a hole in a roof. That's what I need to know.
Have you guys talked much or talked to Billy Wild lately?
Have not. And I don't think Tony ever knew Bill.
Bill was the head guy for the city of New Westminster, and we did a lot of our training out at the West Coast for City of New Westminster. And Bill and I became pretty good friends. I'm talking probably about 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
I stayed at his house a few times when I was traveling through. And
he's been up to visit. And the legend is Billy Wild.
And he's retired, and we still do training.
He was consulting last night.
And we still do training for the City of New West in like that he introduced, and that legacy that he started still continues.
He was an amazing individual. We were talking about the camaraderie and stuff with the people you meet and things like that. I was going, I just separated from my divorce. It was a mutually an amicable thing. I think it was started because you and Norm were at my place one day. Anyway, but that's another story. I'm not kidding either. Anyway, I'm having just a down day, just one of those, I don't know if you've been through anything like a divorce or a traumatic event or in your life or something like that. You have ups and downs with a loss, and just having one of those days, and the phone rings, and Bill, it's Bill on the other end of the phone. And he said, hey, you know what? I don't know what it is. He says, but today I was just thinking about you. What's up? And, we had this long conversation, basically talking me off the wall. We talked for over an hour. He said, hey, let's drive down to the beach, go for a walk on the beach. Let's talk this out. So those are the kind of people that you meet in the industry
that they care about each other. And that's and even my competition in town, I've spawned there's seven tree companies locally that all used to work for me, and I stay in touch with all of them.
Right.
They're just good guys. So it's and that's the industry, and that's the camaraderie.
Yeah, it is. At the end of the day, like James William used to say, no matter whose truck they drove or what company they worked for, at the end of the day, they sat down as good friends.
Yeah. That's something that I strive for too here, and it's good. Like all us trainers and a lot of the students and stuff, you go for beers after work or whatever. Except that one time in Saskatchewan, we missed a flight because we're out for beers.
Oh, really?
Put me up in a hotel. My daughter's home alone. The house front. My ex has to bring her boyfriend into my house to fix it because this guy forgot my charger.
It wasn't me. It was Norm, and you had to stay in Calgary.
We were in Saskatoon, we flew out, and I had to stay in Calgary overnight. You felt bad, but you left me pretty quick. You didn't want the wrath of Thor coming down on you anymore.
But I don't think... I may have had something to do with it, but if I remember... Anyways, it doesn't matter. I apologize.
Saskatoon was another interesting place to teach. That's a city that amazed me. Going back out there was awesome.
And still a long-term customer. We still have a long-standing relationship with the city of Saskatoon.
There was one fellow there that was always pretty into it. He was more of a religious sort of cut.
Tony.
What's that?
Tony Taves.
Tony Taves. Yeah. We went to his house for dinner a couple of times. Met his family, and he toured me about some of the older bigger trees. And Tony Taves.
Yeah, he just texted me this morning actually that they had sold. He had 3 properties that he owned in that area where he lived, and I think originally was his mother's place. But anyways, they sold all 3 properties and they bought a new place, a larger place for the family, and it just happened. He was letting me know. So I'm supposed to go for supper at a new place next time we're in Toontown.
Yeah, there you go. You never got to come on it, but we did that. We did the Red Creek Fur Climb and that was Frank Chippy. There's another guy that I miss a lot. He was fun to train with. He was a pretty intense individual, but you learned a lot. Like we were doing we had the dynamometer set up on a footlock because Frank was, he was world champion at the time, and we're doing the footlock and we're just trying to figure out what our loads were on the dynamometers. So, and we were doing a rescue and climbing the tail of the rope. So, how much were you loading? So we put the dynamometer up, and Frank at the time, I think he weighed about 185, 190 pounds, and he footlocked up. And the way he thrust it up, he was getting some incredible force loads on the dyno. I think it was well over 400 or 500 pounds, just that bounce and that spring, on the dyno. And then we set it up for a rescue scenario where he would footlock up and rescue me. So I had to get my fat ass up 40 feet, footlock up, and then just hang there, and he'd climb the tail. And
the force loads with me at 240 and him at 185 were less with him climbing the tail than they were with him just footlocking by himself because I'll use the term mass dampening because there was a lot of mass in the dampening, but it was you learned a lot of stuff like that, which you just don't elsewhere.
Yeah, and we don't do as much anymore, and it's far more difficult to do. And I would say some would argue that rightfully so, because it was anecdotal, it was non-scientific. I think it was enlightening, but like now I think a lot of our instructors might find that irresponsible potentially, that we're just creating questions, and because it's not defendable, like you could be creating more questions and answers. But at the same time, I guess I feel stuck between those worlds, because I really like that part of things, and I think there is value in it, but the way that people can research things these days, the way things can be documented, videoed, and it was left at those days to discussion, and it would be, that's what someone saw and heard. It wasn't what someone watched in a video, and I don't know. But I do remember that very specifically, and it was very interesting that we had less, like when two people were on the rope, and I'll talk about that to this day. It's not the same as it is when one person can generate more than two, which makes no sense, but it's true.
It is. I mean, we had the instrumentation to deal with it. I did another one. I was in Victoria doing a advanced felling course where we're doing a lot of guying, and the trees that we had to work with was this clump of cottonwood, so they were all together. So you push the limits as to how tight, because as we were falling the trees, you're at a 45-degree angle for the first bunch, and it got tighter and tighter and tighter until you're only about 3 or 4 feet. Like we pushed it until we failed, so we could figure out exactly how tight a guy you could have that would make it actually work. And you just pushed it until it failed, and it was a great learning experience for the students, because you set it up as a failure. Okay, we're going to work until we fail. You don't go into front of students and then have it fail and then try and explain it. You explain that you're going to fail first, and they could see where they could actually physically see what you were doing and where the failure point was and what was probable and what was possible. And that was so much fun to do, especially out of UBC, where we had all those alders, which are barber chair heaven. All and you could just, you can set up scenarios where, okay, this is an advanced rigging course. You guys are going to set up a double block system. You're going to pick the whole tree, and you're going to move it over here, and then you're going to slide it over here, and then you're going to lay it down over there, all with your ropes and rigging, figure it out. You just push stuff. And it was a lot of fun.
And I think we do still do a lot of that. But Tony, I'm curious where you would land on all that kind of stuff.
I think when we were doing that originally, it was cool because it was in the context of the course, you could learn a lot. The reason I really don't do it now much is because inevitably somebody whips out their phone and they start recording it, and then it gets posted somewhere else, and it's not in the context of the course anymore, and it literally gets taken for science, and it's not science.
It's experimentation.
Exactly, but when I think is what has happened, and I don't know why, and maybe it's part of that social media thing, it can very easily be pulled out of context, and guys are basing like major decisions on something that is just informative. And I don't think that the guys are seeing it that way. So I will do it often I'll do that in a course. I have a, dynamometer, and we'll do different things and look at forces, but I always tell them, I say, like, guys, just don't record this, because it's not, you can't take it out of the context that it's in this course.
That's the hard part with social media now is exactly what you say. And if somebody takes just part of it and said, hey, I saw this guy, he's a professional trainer and he did this, takes it out of context, not knowing that you're trying to push it to failure. It can be a very dangerous thing. Fortunately, I got out of that before social media became a really big deal.
Yeah, and I find you just have to be careful with it, because, like you said, they take a snippet of it, or and it's out of context, and then because you saw it on the internet, it must be true now. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, you walk a fine line there, and I think I think the students now, they want a little more data preciseness than than what you can give them. So I think it's like, I love to use it when we're setting up 5-to-1 systems, because you pull it, you get 100 pounds and you get 200 pounds, and it really brings stuff home. But I'm very, very careful about using it, if it could be taken out of context, because it could really, I wouldn't want someone to take that information as being, oh, this is fact, this can be done, and then base a decision on that, and then have something go terribly wrong. And that's
the interesting thing with our industry is I have never climbed 2 identical trees or felled 2 identical trees. Every scenario is completely different. So it's you got to fill up your toolbox, that mental toolbox. The problem I find with guys today, like I've got some real keeners and good guys. One, in fact, the guy that fell, he placed second in the BC Tree Climbing Championships. His first competition was just outside the top 10 at the PNWs. in his first crack at it, and he'll be right up in the top in a year or two. But they have so much available to them that they don't know which tool to pull out of the box. Like, there's so many in there, they can't make a decision as to what's the best tool to use or what's the best technique to use. I mean, sometimes when you're taking a tree down, you know what? Cut and chuck, chunk it down. Mm-hmm. That's, there's a guy at the coast who's a contract climber. He's a great guy, super good guy, super knowledgeable, really knows his stuff. But he has a tendency, when he's contracting for people, to overcomplicate things and set up these incredible rigging scenarios, which are awesome, but they take from a practical standpoint, which is what I really liked about Arb Canada and Arbormaster, is we're trying to teach these guys how to be good arborists. But most of them are working for themselves or working for businesses or the city. They also need to be productive, so teaching them which tool. This tool is going to make this job quicker. If you can put a 3-to-1 in it, a 5-to-1, if you can slow it down and rig out bigger pieces, or you can do lifts or drifts or whatever, that's going to make the job easier. But don't unnecessarily complicate it, which happens a lot with a lot of the newer generation of guys.
Yeah, very much so. Sometimes harder is smarter, and it's a message you got to get. Sometimes it's a hard job. It's a hard dollar, and sometimes you work hard, and there's no way around it. It's the best, most efficient, safest way to get it done. Yeah,
and that's the whole deal. What's the safest, most economical way to get it done? You want those tools in your toolbox, but there's so much gear out there now, and so many different rigging techniques and climbing techniques that people are exposed to, that it can overcomplicate things, and that can be that it's the guy with little experience but a lot of knowledge but no experience that's the danger. That's where it can get complicated, and I think that's where we see some of the injuries in our industry is guys that are overcomplicating things a little bit too much. You want to teach them all of that stuff, but you got to start with the basics. That's the best thing that with Arb Canada when we first started in Arbormaster is you went over the history of saddles, and you had 10 different saddles from the beginning kind of stuff to the latest at the time. And you went through the history of it. You went through the history of ropes. You went through the history of all of that stuff, the history of climbing, the progression of knots and hitches. Well, these guys are coming into the industry. Like, I still make my staff here tie a Blake hitch, because of that one time that Johnny Ransom dropped his little hitch out of the tree when he got to the top, and he had to win the competition on a closed system, right? You don't, you gotta. I think Norm, he probably got it from you, but he used to tell a scenario where you have that old pickup truck, and you had to bend this one little wrench this certain way to get that one little bolt under the distributor cap. We don't have that pickup truck anymore, but you still have that wrench in the toolbox. So you can't forget, if you got to learn from the ground up, you got to learn those basics, because you need them sometimes,
And I think there's sort of too, I see a little bit of a gap. Like, there's a lot of guys, they're good technicians, and they understand what the equipment can bear. They understand the ropes and all the knots and the hitches. What they're lacking is a knowledge of tree structure, right? They'll put this great system up there, and it's like, dude, that's not a good spot for it. And they're like, what? I'm like, don't you understand that's that branch union is not strong. Put it on the next one. And they're like, oh. I'm like, yeah, the tree's part of it. So, like I said, part of the arboriculture, one of the difference with Arboriculture Canada training was given that you can have the equipment, but you also have to know what the tree's doing, right? Because that's the unpredictable thing. So one thing
a lot of that comes with experience in the industry. It was I think it was Dwayne that we were at a course. It was one of the first ones, and it's something that I stuck. I tell my guys too. He said, when that old guy is hanging around and you're teaching, and he looks at you, or you're on the job site, and he's an old logger, an old arborist or something like that, and he looks at you and he says, Sonny, I just don't think it's going to quite work that way. Listen, because he might know something about the trees in that area, because I certainly know that the trees in my area, the same species, when I'm climbing in Ontario and stuff, they react a little bit differently. And then their structure's a little bit differently. They may grow quicker at the West Coast and they're weaker wooded. So it's all of those things, and there's little bits and pieces of information that you can garner from those people around you. That was one of the real cool things about the training companies, is being able to teach in Victoria and then do a seminar in Toronto, and then and teach in St. Catharines, and do a training seminar for Vermeer in Fresno, and then train the trainer in Tampa, and then work in the wintertime in frozen trees in Winnipeg. So you had this diverse set of knowledge that you could only garner through the experiences that we had, and to be able to pass that on is special.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're trying to. It's a balancing act with that, because the guys always still enjoy that. They enjoy, experiencing tree work and tree work in different locales. It does. It seasons the toolbox, if you will.
It does. Yeah, it does.
And I think
sure.
I think it's there was a word that came to me when you were talking. I think the word, it seems, I feel like it's humility. Like it's always having a place for someone else's experience, and you just never know. Like, just to be able to give pause to whatever someone's thinking or thought, they just might see something you didn't see or you don't know, and being willing to take time to do that and be open to whatever, like it's when, I know for myself, if I get too narrow-minded or focused, like I think I know, I can miss what might be obvious. I remember doing a hazard danger course up in Fort Mac, and we had this hung tree, and it had broke off maybe 10 foot up, and then it was tilted, hung over. And then we're looking at the trunk section, trying to figure what kind of cut of the 3 cuts could we put in it. And me and the whole class, and there was one new person, very new. He wasn't even really from the arborist industry at all. He was just hired there. And most of the other crew wasn't their first time on an Arbor Canada course. So we're trying to figure out how can we utilize this scenario to make it safe and apply the lesson. And, he just looked at it and he was like, well, what if you got a rope over the, where it was broken, and you just were to pull on it? And you could, you have this equipment, and yeah, it was the best way to do it. It just made sense. And why would you force another way just for the sake of, so we did that, dealt with it, and then we found another tree. But none of us saw it, and he saw it because he was looking at it so simplistically.
Exactly. We've with Bartlett, we have to have a monthly safety committee meeting, and it involves myself as the manager, the admin, because she's just super smart, and the LOSC, our local office safety coordinator, and the last guy hired, the newest guy that doesn't know shit. And he's there because he's looking at things from a different perspective, right? Like it's we get so used to things. Like you can go into your house and you've got that old pile of magazines in the corner, and you don't even see it anymore. It's been sitting there for 10 years covered in dust, and you don't even know it's there, right? But a new guy comes along and he sees that and cleans it up. Chips had a really good example. I don't know if you remember Darren Dreger or not. What the hell was that saying that he came up with that? It'll come to me in a minute here, but it was he was on Chips's job. He was new ground guy. It was maybe the first or second day that he was working, and Frank had gone up. He had tied up above the piece that he was going to rig out. So he stayed on his line. He did the face cut, while he was still tied above, set all his rigging, and it was about to start his back kite. Well, he hadn't extracted his line from above yet. And Darren looks at this and he says, I don't know much about this, but that just doesn't look right to me. And Frank looked at it and new guy saved his life just like that, So everybody looks at things from a different perspective, and it's important. Humility is something that comes with failure, comes with age, and seeing some things, and man, I've been humbled a lot by the trees themselves, and you learn, One of Shigo's pithy points, you wouldn't know it by the way I'm talking today, but one of Shigo's pithy points was, "You have 2 ears and 1 mouth. There is a lesson here."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think humility comes from a position of wanting to learn too, right? And I think, of all the ArborCan instructors I've been involved with over the years, and active and inactive, it's like one of the reasons we did it is we wanted to share and help people, but we also just wanted to learn, had that creativity or that curiosity that was like insatiable about the work. And, you'll listen to people because they might, you can be humble because you have to take everything into account. And I think that leads to a lot.
It is.
It's impossible to learn something you think you already know.
I've got a degree in horticulture. I've been an arborist, certified arborist since '96, a trainer with Arb Canada for a long period of time. And I know that I know less now than I did then. Mm-hmm. You as you age and you get wisdom and humility, you start to know what you don't know. And that's a super important thing to learn. The scariest one are, these guys, and I was one of them. I didn't know what I didn't know. Like, I knew everything, and you take it to heart. But now you get older, you start to know what you don't know, and you can learn. And hanging around with some of the guys, I don't know if you've met Dr. Zwart from Bartlett or not, Dwayne, but or Smiley or those guys. Smiley, course, yeah. But Dr. Zwart is he loves hockey, he loves football, he'll drink, loves beer, and he's one of the boys. And then you take this guy and you put him in a room of scientists, and then you listen to what they're saying and what they're talking, and you feel so stupid. It's amazing what you can learn. It was like hanging out with Shigo, and the depth of knowledge of some of these guys is just amazing. And you can garner something from anybody that you're talking to. You can garner a little piece of knowledge, and if you don't learn something new every day, you haven't had a good day.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's and like Kennedy said, the greater our knowledge increases, the greater our ignorance unfolds.
It is. It absolutely does. But that's where you have to have the humility and not pigeonhole yourself for one idea. We haven't learned hardly anything yet as far as trees go. There's so many things that we're learning. With Paul Stamets' work in having the mycorrhizal between the trees, feeding each other and communicating with each other, and all that work that's being done. And I love to. Royal Roads has a great setup where they had felled a bunch of trees years and years and years ago, probably in the 30s or 40s, and there were these 4 and 5 foot stumps in the bush that completely compartmentalized. They completely walled over on the top. And I find that here and there once in a while up here, but it's amazing to look at that these other trees, to protect themselves, healed off this thing that we thought was dead. And and that's just a very, very small example of just opening your eyes and seeing what's out there.
Yeah. And I have pictures of those stumps in in the pruning or the biology section of the pruning book. I can't remember, maybe even in the tree rest book, but we do often talk about how great it would be to one day dissect them. And hopefully nobody, if it ever comes to that someone that appreciates it would actually be the one to take time to see what went on in there.
Dave actually kicked a guy off of the site because he wanted to. He says, "Well, I'm going to cut these lower for you so I can take them home and turn some bowls." And he says, "No, you're not."
Yeah. He would have. Well, it was man, what a great trip down memory lane, as they could say. It was. I really appreciate your time, Thor. We don't have a set time. It seems like it's always I don't know, maybe just a natural biorhythm biological responses or whatever that happens at this time, but it seems like right around 70 minutes is where we get. We often segue, but we don't have to by any means. But I wanted to thank you, for the time that you have spent, and I just really enjoy it myself. So it's a great, I remember James would talk about this. He would be very careful to mention that while he loved helping people and training was something that he was passionate about, he was always very careful to explain that he loved it and he got that out of it too. And if it stopped being meaningful for him and stopped, if the river stopped flowing underneath his boat, he wouldn't get on it anymore. And it was the selfish side of training for him. He said, I love it so much. And that's how I feel about these,
I think it's everyone. And you talk about the connections and the training and what you get out of it. I got one last story to
absolutely.
Tell. I'm in Naramata, started my own company, never done crane work before, but you and I had talked about it and you had mentioned how it's done and I've never been to a crane course. So we've got I think it was about a 40-ton crane there. We're picking apart this dead as a doornail cottonwood, and there's nobody else around here that can do it. So someone's got to do it. You're the guy standing there. So I've got, Tony, if you could imagine, I've got the crane set up. I'm in my gear. I've got Dwayne on the phone going, okay, crane set up. It's over the pick. What do we do now? He says, okay, have him bring the boom down to you, tie in. He's going to lift you up above. Okay, I'm above the tree now, Dwayne. What do I do now?
Maybe that was Arbor Canada's first crane course.
It was
it was Arbor Canada's first. I can guarantee it was Arbor Canada's first crane course.
Phone a friend.
It was
crane
done
removal
in the moment.